have some bad news this morning. My watch stopped at 3 minutes till 10, so it could be a really long sermon. So we continue our road trip this morning, and ironically, while I was working on these sermons, the San Diego Union Tribune ran a wonderful cartoon about road trips that maybe you can relate to. Here's the family driving down the road. The sign says it's the highway of life, and upcoming are 3 possible exits: woulda, coulda, shoulda. Maybe that's something you can relate to if you're looking in the rearview mirror of your road trip. But I always like to drive forward, and so we've been driving forward, thinking about the Christian's road trip in the special challenges, the diversions, the difficulties of the 21st century. So the first week, if you remember, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? God's people said in Babylonian captivity. And as we looked at it, God's people had long lived in a foreign land, had often lived in a foreign land, and had to learn to sing God's song. And one of the things we have to embrace in this trip through the 21st century is that we are foreigners, we are exiles, this is not our land, we are aliens, and we're on a different road trip than everybody else. We're marching to Zion. The second week we looked at the fact that the world is full of decay and darkness. Change and decay in all around I see, the author of Abide With Me wrote, as he faced tuberculosis in his case. And that's what happens when you leave a room and you don't leave a light on. At night it gets dark. And if you leave meat on the counter for a week and don't put it in the refrigerator, it decays. So the question is not why do things get dark and why do they decay? That's the very nature of things. The question is, where is the salt or the preservative and where is the light? And that's our role as we go through and deal with the change and the decay and the darkness of our world. Then last week we talked about how the world is complex, and we are called upon not to get caught up in all that complexity. And instead of going through the world with just our eyes and our ears that are taking in all of the complexities and our mind that get absorbed in the complexities, we're to go through the world with our hearts, a single-minded heart, singly focused on the Lord. This is how we deal with complexity, is we go through the world with our hearts, not taking in everything that our ears and eyes and brains see in this complex world. And so this morning, in what is actually our final one of these lessons, we ask the question, what resources does God provide for our road trip through the 21st century? And I want to start with this very tricky word, expectations, because I think that word comes up again and again in life, and it does cause complications for us. A company might deliver good earnings, but they were not as good as the market expected, so their stock actually goes down. A politician didn't do a great job in a debate, but his poll numbers went up. Why would that be? Because the experts say he outperformed expectations. We had decided what he'd be like, and if he was better than we had expected, then his poll numbers go up. I saw a movie. Everybody else thought it was good, but I had higher expectations that the movie did not meet, so I didn't particularly like the movie. A quarterback throws an incomplete pass, or worse, an interception. But really it happened not because of what the quarterback did, but the receiver didn't go where the quarterback expected, and so the play did not work. Over the years, Sally and I can trace a few problems and disagreements in our marriage over a little problem we have come to call unfulfilled expectations. If we have expectations and they're not fulfilled, it can cause problems. Shakespeare wrote, very simply and I think truly, oft expectation fails. And I like the way that leadership expert John Maxwell put it, disappointment is the gap between expectations and reality. If you expect something and it doesn't work out, then it does often result in disappointment. So, transitioning, the question that I pose to you is this: what expectations do you have of God? What do you expect God to do in your life this week? Do you expect God to be active in your life this week? If so, do we sometimes have very specific expectations? And if God doesn't meet them, do we feel let down by God? Do we feel disappointed, maybe even disillusioned? The writer C.S. Lewis had been married only 3 years when his wife died. And he was deeply disappointed because God did not come to him, did not seem near to him, did not seem to be helping him in the valley of the shadow of death. Eventually, as he worked through his grief, he saw that the real problem was his own expectations of what God would be doing, which were wrong and caused him to miss entirely what God was actually doing for him and in his life. I appreciate the saying, disillusionment is the child of illusion. If you are disillusioned, it may well be because you had some illusions. You had some mistaken ideas about what would happen, what should happen. Which brings us to our text this morning, Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 to 31. Again, we're asking the question, what resources might God have for us for our journey, our road trip through the 21st century? And I think it's addressed well here in Isaiah chapter 40. Here, God's people are in that terrible Babylonian captivity. They're waiting for God to do something. And so let's read the text. In verse 28, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But here's the key verse. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And so, we focus on waiting on the Lord. Those who wait on the Lord. The New International Version says, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. Unfortunately, nobody likes waiting, right? Sitting in a waiting room, on hold on the telephone, in line at the airport, wait. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the author, said, how much of human life is lost in waiting? But waiting with God is different. It's not just dead time. Things are happening. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. Little known, Paul spent 3 years after his Damascus Road experience in the wilderness. David was hiding in caves. But all of this time, God was getting them ready for something. Something was happening. It was not just dead waiting time. Maybe he was breaking down their own sense of self-sufficiency so that they were ready to really rely on him. Maybe he was building a closer and a more intimate relationship with them. But in Hebrew, this word waiting involves active anticipation. Or as I said, according to the NIV, hoping in the Lord. And that's a different kind of waiting than the dead time we experience in our daily lives. I like the way the psalmist put it in Psalm chapter 27 and verse 14. Simply, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. That's the message. So, this key verse, Isaiah 40:31, starts with those who wait on the Lord, an active anticipation, understanding that even while we're waiting, the Lord is probably doing things to get us ready for something. And what happens then when we wait for the Lord? I think the texts give us 3 pictures, 3 images, 3 ways that God might help us along our journey, whether we're in Babylonian captivity, as they were, or whether we're traveling through this challenging 21st century. And the first of those pictures, the first way that God may act in our lives, is to empower us to soar on wings as eagles, the text says. God can intervene. He can change the course that we're on. He can allow us to fly out of a difficult situation. I did a little research this week on how eagles soar, and it was kind of interesting. They wait, here's that waiting again, They wait for a thermal wind, an updraft that is caused by change in heat and in temperature. And then they spread their wings and they catch that thermal wind. And eagles can soar extremely high, as I'm sure you've seen, and they can go very long distances with really just a single flap of the wind to get them into this thermal wind that they have caught. So in Isaiah, here we are also waiting like eagles to catch the wind from God that would allow us to soar, and sometimes even to soar out of difficult situations. And again, if you remember, we see in the Bible that God does act that way, intervening, dramatically, miraculously changing the whole flow of events. So in Mark chapter 1, the leper cried out to Jesus, "If you will, you can heal me." And Jesus did. He intervened in his life. He let him soar out of his leprosy. As Peter tried to walk on the water and began to fall, he cried out, "Please save me." And Jesus intervened and stepped in and changed the course of things to save Peter. I wonder if one of the ways that we limit God today is we've lost our expectation. We've lost our belief that God acts like that anymore. We think, oh, that was back in the Bible. That was back in older times. And sometimes we chalk up miraculous events or changes to anything but God. But Isaiah says, don't overlook the fact that God may choose to let you soar on wings like eagles. He may intervene and dramatically change the circumstances of your life. But I also wonder if maybe an even bigger problem we have with this today is that sometimes we only pray for that kind of help. We say, God, please rescue me. Take me out of this situation. But Isaiah, I think, reminds us that there are other ways that God may be able to help us and choose to do so. And so the second picture that we have here in the text is that we can run and not grow weary. And the picture I see here is of us using our own resources, but God coming alongside and collaborating with us and helping us as we use our own resources. You may have heard the story of the beginning skier who got lost onto an advanced slope by mistake, became nervous and afraid, began to fall head over heel, finally was able to grab the tree, and there he was, sort of dangling from the tree with his boots kind of falling off. And as he was in this predicament, he cried out, "Is there anybody up there?" And a deep voice replied, "Yes, I am here." "Who are you?" the skier asked. "I am the Lord." The skier said, "Well, God, please rescue me." The Lord replied, "Let go of the tree, put on your skis, ski down the slope, and I will be with you." The skier said, "But I'm only a beginning skier, and this is an advanced slope." Again, the Lord replied, "Let go of the tree, put on your skis, ski down the slope, I will be with you." After a very long pause, the skier said, "Is there anybody else up there?" Rather than jumping in to fix our situations and our lives, sometimes maybe for our own growth, maybe given the nature of the problem, God asks us to use the powers that we already possess and that He will work with us. He will help us. He will support us. And I think in the Bible, this is really well illustrated by the whole experience of Moses and the children of Israel. I imagine at first Moses thought that God was just going to rescue them from Pharaoh and from Egypt. But no, that's not how God was going to do this. This was something that God and Moses and the people of Israel were going to have to do together. Moses would have to risk standing up to Pharaoh. He would have to risk challenging those grumbling Israelite people. And he would have to move for 40 years through that wilderness, but God would help him, and he would not be weary. So this, I think, is a second kind of help we can expect from God, and that we should be prepared for it, to see it, to observe it, and to follow through with it. And then the third picture that we have in this wonderful little passage, I think, is that we will walk and not be faint. There we go. It may not seem so at first, but I actually think this is a very powerful image. Because sometimes what God does is he just holds us up in the difficulties and challenges of life. This was Paul's experience when he had his thorn in the flesh, that we don't really know exactly what it was. But he was greatly troubled and greatly pained by this thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And God basically says, Paul, I'm going to let you live with this one. I will let you walk, but you won't faint. I will stand behind you, but I'm not going to rescue this for this one. And God surely had his own reasons for doing that. And sometimes in life, that's what we most need. If you could think of your times of deepest discouragement and despair, I think about the death of my father during my college years. I could have prayed for a miraculous intervention, I suppose, but there was really no place to soar in a situation like that. I could have asked for his collaboration to help me run and not be weary, but frankly, I had nothing to give in that situation. Finally, the only promise that fit was this one, that I would be able to walk and not be faint. I would be able to stand. I would be able to make it through that most difficult of situations. I read the suggestion that actually these are maybe in reverse order of priority. We might hope for the first one, soaring on wings like eagles, but maybe the highest form of help is not a dramatic intervention, but in the deepest, darkest moments of our lives, the hardest thing to do is just to walk and not faint. And so this is also a gift from God, the gift of endurance, the gift of being able to press on and to carry on. So these, I think, are three ways that we can count on for God to help us through this road trip of the 21st century. But going back to our word expectations, it's very easy, I think, to have a problem with God if you start with the wrong set of expectations. We look at a predicament and we cry out, God, do something. Or like C.S. Lewis following the death of his wife, we think he should be acting in certain ways, but we don't see him acting. So he must not be there at all. He must not be helping at all. And we may give in to a feeling of disappointment or despair. But Isaiah reminds us that not only does God act, but we need to come to appreciate the different ways that he may act in our lives. Sometimes he will rescue. We can mount up on wings like eagles. Sometimes he collaborates. We will run and not grow weary. And sometimes he gives the gift of endurance. We will run and not be faint. So if we wait upon the Lord with this kind of hope and this kind of spirit, we will, as Isaiah promises, renew our strength.